talked about we were going to talk about Ruth tonight. And I was telling Sandra, I've had this book for umpteen years. I bought it at Cokesbury, so that was more than 6 or 10 years ago. And I just had never really picked it up. I like the picture. And it's got like neat pictures all through it with the story of Ruth. But I picked it up and it really caught my attention this time because it talks about the experiences of Ruth and how they're common to all of our experiences. Most of us, when I say, what do you know about the book of Ruth? You say, Naomi, Boaz, where you go, I'll go, where you're buried, I'll be buried, that kind of thing. But there's so much more in those 4 little chapters. If you just look at it from how that affects our lives, how it parallels our lives. As far as the background on the book, we don't know who wrote the book of Ruth. She surely didn't write it. If she had, it never would have made it to the scripture. They're not even sure what time frame it was written in, somewhere between 500 and 1000 BCE, trying to figure out who was king and who was all this threw it out. But it does hit on important parts in all of our lives. And it starts out basically with 3 women who are left penniless, husbandless, alone. And we're going to look at some of that, and then we're also going to look at the guy character in the book, the main guy character, Boaz, because he is just overflowing with generosity. Usually if you hear people talk about Boaz, they say he was an honorable man. That's nice. But there's more to his story than just that. And you see on your sheet, I've listed 12 things that work through this book. And if we think about it as we're working through this, we'll see how it affects all of us. It's not just Ruth and Naomi and Orpah. Oprah's name was supposed to be in that one, Orpah, but they misspelled it on her birth certificate. And so we'll see how those kind of things hit our lives. If you look at the first one in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. Now these aren't big passages, so I know there's going to be people just chomping at the bit to read. Ruth 1:1. Once upon a time, it was back in the days when judges led Israel, there was a famine in the land. A man from Bethlehem in Judea left his home to live in the country of Moab. This man's name a little further was Elimelech. If I ever have a cat, that's what I want to name it next time, Elimelech. And his wife was Naomi. His sons were Mahlon and Chilion, all Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judea. They all went to the country of Moab and settled there. So before we get to look at the loss, there was a famine. Israel had lots of famines. And it wasn't always because God was punishing them, some of it was just the weather. Global warming even back then. And there was no food. And so they went to Moab. You think, okay, they went to a different country. Moab was the complete dialectical, directional, theological opposite of Israel. You hear Moabites talked about in the scripture a lot of times. And one of the biggest things in the Moab religion was the sacrifice of children. And so it wasn't like they just, moved over to North Carolina or somewhere like that. It was a whole different situation. So the first thing we see about here is there was a tragedy, a loss. Things happen in our lives, losses. Sometimes they're our own choices in doing, and sometimes it's something way beyond our control. But we see here that there's a tragedy. If you look on just a little bit further, you'll find out that here are these women with 3 dead husbands. Naomi's husband dies, Ruth's husband dies, Orpah's husband dies. Okay, well, we have lots of that happens in life. People's partners, husbands, wives die. What do you think that meant in this time and day when the husband died?
You mean financial-wise, or?
Anyway, culture, financial, family.
Well, they didn't have any money.
They didn't have any money.
And they did not go out and work.
Mm-hmm. And the women were property, and when the husband died, they had nothing. There was no Social Security, there was no Medicare, Medicaid. And in this case, all 3 husbands died. The girls' husbands died. Did you see anything? Let's look at verses 3 to 5. Elimelech died, and Naomi was left, and she and her 2 sons. The sons took Moabite wives. The name of the first was Orpah, the second Ruth. They lived there in Moab for the next 10 years, but then the 2 brothers died. Now the women were either her young men or her husband. Okay. So it's not just like one dies, but all of their support system. Do you see anything in these 10 years about children? No, they didn't have any children. They couldn't sit back and wait for the kids to grow up and start bringing in money. Just think, y'all can wait for trips to do that. They had nothing. They had nothing. They were back to their own assets, which were, like Pat said, nothing. Orpah and Naomi have really sparse options. These Israelites have moved to Moab. These Israelite boys married Moabite wives. Let's go over there properly. What choices did those two women have? Why couldn't they just go home and get married again? They had married Israelites, and that kind of made them tainted, you know? It's kind of like, it's not color-wise like biracial couples, but there was that much difference in them. And they had misfortune and loss. Misfortune is when something happens, you know, that's not really fixable. And loss is when it's really not fixable. What happens when you lose a job, a partner, a support system, financially or otherwise? What's your first reaction when something like that happens? Shock? Grief. Grief. Can destabilize you for a while. You know, if you ever have somebody that goes through a great loss like that and they immediately bounce back and start doing well, watch out, because it will come later. But sometimes when something like that happens, it can open us up to new things. In verses 6 and 7, Naomi, once she got herself together, she and her 2 daughters-in-law to leave the country of Moab and set out for home. She had heard that God had been pleased to visit God's people and give them food. And so she started out from the place she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, on the road back to the land of Judah. Things are changing. Change happens in our life. Change is going to happen. Growth is optional. You ever heard that before? Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. So this loss now is taking them away, sending them back to a different life. Who do you think it was that would have been the hardest on to go back to Judah? Naomi, Orpah, or Ruth?
Naomi.
Why would it be hard for her to go back?
She was older.
Okay, she was older. She also had left during the rough times. She's going to go back to people who had suffered through the famine. And she's going to be going back now that there's food. She wasn't going back because family was writing and asking her to come. She had heard there was food, and that's where she was going back to. The other thing is, when Naomi goes back, she's not the same person who left. Have you ever run into people that you hadn't seen in a while? Sometimes you don't recognize them. Literally don't recognize them. Other times, they're not who you used to know. I ran into a woman this morning. I was eating breakfast with Kathy and Mo. And I saw this woman who, one minute I walked in, she stood up and embraced me. And Catherine, how are you doing? I'm thinking, who is this woman? And I kind of recognized her face, but my Rolodex was just spinning. I had not a clue. Well, fortunately, Kathy came by later and introduced herself. And I found out I knew this woman when I worked in Zuni 20 years ago or more. Her face was the same, her spirit was the same, but I had no idea what was going on. So her life had changed a lot, and Naomi's life had changed a lot. How do you think all this death might have affected her physically?
Beating her up. She would be very exhausted.
Beating her up, exhausted. She may have changed, you know, have you ever seen people who go through a hard time and maybe they get gray overnight? Or they lose hair? Or they, you know, their body just changes a lot. And so Naomi's not the same person who left that's coming back. All change is not always progress. Did you hear that? All change is not always progress. Change sometimes is necessary. But you know, we don't leave them now just sitting on the road to Judah being pitiful. Someone read for me chapter 1, 8 through 9.
After a short while on the road, Naomi took her 2 daughters-in-law. Go back, go home, and live with your mothers. And may God treat you as graciously as you treated your deceased husbands and me. May God give each of you a new home and a new husband. She kissed them, and they cried openly.
Let's see, so Naomi's saying, go back to your mama's house. You know, they probably were still relatively young. Maybe God will give you another husband. And then verses 14 to 17. Again, they cried openly. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth embraced her and held on. Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law is going back home to live with her own people and God's. Go with her. But Ruth said, do not force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I go. And where you live, I'll live. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I'll die. And that's where I'll be buried. So help me, God. Not even death itself is going to come between us. You know, there's lots of names for God in the Bible. And the one that's used here and later at the end of the book is El Shaddai. Now, some people are going to watch this video and be maybe upset. The Hebrew word shad is breast. And El Shaddai is calling God the mighty-breasted one. That'll get you thinking for a while. So some things begin transformation. Some things start to change. Orpah goes home. She goes back. We don't know what happened to her. It's another one of those, what's the rest of the story? And Naomi really tries to get Oprah to go back. Why would she not want to take her back to Israel with her, back to Judah with her? First of all, you have to realize that Ruth was a darker complected person than Naomi. She didn't speak the language. She didn't know and understand the same God. And she was a widow. She was, quote unquote, used material. They would have phrased it that day. But something shifted and things had to change. They came to a juncture, not their own choosing. They weren't even prepared for it. I'd love to see Naomi's face. You know, when she's talking to these girls and they're both crying and, you know, Middle Eastern people grieving, crying, all that stuff. And Orpah turns around and heads home. And here's Naomi still standing here. Can you imagine Naomi going, what am I going to do with you? What's happening here? But did you hear the connection those women had? Did you hear the love? And she already said that you will find somebody that, you know, you'll take care of like you did my sons and me. That gets left out of that story sometimes, the way that she'd been such a good daughter-in-law. I haven't got any daughters or sons-in-law, but it's interesting how in some families, the daughter and sons-in-law, sons and daughter-in-law, whichever, are really close to the other parent, and others are not. When my grandfather, my dad's father, died, he made my mother, his daughter-in-law, his executor. The other girls didn't like that. Not at all. But there's just different relationships. This was obviously a close one. Orpah goes back. She knows the rules. She can fit in again. She won't be going into a different culture. She'll just, you know, be where she used to be, but have to talk somebody into still marrying her. Ruth was dutiful. She followed the rules. She ended up in the middle of a mystery at odds. The culture was going to be different. The country was going to be different. The language was going to be different. The religion was going to be different. And her role in life was different. She was going to be going back as a widow. Do you follow what a big decision that must have been made for her? What's the farthest you've ever moved from one place to another? You know what I'm saying? Who's moved to a new place more than 1,000 miles? More than 2,000. I guess it won't be 3,000. When I went to California, I only knew the person that went with me. I'd met a few of those people at conferences and stuff, but I didn't know anybody. I would talk about Lakeside and they look at me like I was crazy. I'd watch Designing Women and I'd be cracking up and they'd be looking at me like, what's the joke? Now, I still had the same language, sort of. Still had the same culture, sort of. But it was a really big change. I can't even imagine what a big change this was going to be. A transformation, not to mention accents. People would call the church phone just to hear my accent, because we met at 4949 Foothill Road. But when I got there, it was 4949 Foothill Road. So a big transformation happens in these women's lives. Is this something they got a plan for and wrote out a map for and had an action plan for? No, it just happened and they had to do something. And this is especially one for Pat. The aging, 19 to 21. I couldn't resist.
I can't believe you. Of all the people. Thank you.
It's all right. When I told that woman this morning I was going to be 69 in May, she about fell out of her chair.
Oh, well.
When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was soon buzzing. Is this really our Naomi after all this time? And she said, don't call me Naomi, call me bitter. The strong one has dealt me a bitter blow. I left here full of life and God has brought me back with nothing but the clothes on my back. Why would you call me Naomi? God certainly doesn't. The strong one ruined me. She's been gone at least 10 years, and probably much longer than that. And a hard life, a hard change. Naomi, her name meant pleasant. She doesn't sound real pleasant, does she? And that's why she says, call me bitter. Sometimes we have to own our stuff. We have to own where we are. Especially if we're going to move on to that at all. She's had a hard life. She's been disillusioned with God. Did you hear what she called God here in the Message version? The strong one. Not the loving one. Not the El Shaddai. Strong one. And notice how she kind of puts it back like Moses did the other day. Brought me back with nothing on the clothes of my back. Look what God has done to me. Sounds a little bitter there, doesn't it? So much so, evidently, that she wasn't even that easily recognized. Again, picture this, Sophia, Golden Girls. Picture this old, I think of her as being bent woman with the clothes on her back, probably a bit ragged, coming back into her hometown. And not just her, but look who's with her. This very young, evidently attractive Moabite. You say, well, how would you know that she was a Moabite? Probably by her clothes. Probably by even how she stood or walked. It could have been told she was that. So time has happened. That happens to all of us. You ever gone somewhere and people didn't know who you were? I love it, the fact that I've got Sandra and Sherry and Kathy and a couple of others that will go up. I've even said to you before, go ask that person what their name is, because I don't have a clue. I don't have a clue. Okay, so we've got them back there now, and Naomi's all bitter and upset. Things are not good. Verse 22, so Naomi was back, and Ruth, the foreigner, was with her. Back from the country of Moab, they arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now that's going to prove to be really important. Why is it important later in the story, beginning of the harvest? It's how they get some food. You ever heard the term gleaning? In fact, there's actually an organization that will go out and pick crops after they've been picked for people, for helping people who don't have food. So now they're back on their own. As it happened that Naomi had a relative by marriage, a man prominent and rich, connected with Elimelech's family. His name was Boaz. One day, Ruth, the Moabite foreigner, said to Naomi, I'm going to work. I'm going out to glean among the sheaves, following after some of the harvesters who will treat me kindly. Naomi said, go ahead, dear daughter. There were no food pantries. There wasn't even a faith community you could go and say, I really need food. People were expected to take care of their own and their families. Fortunately, Naomi remembers there's a distant relative What does that tell you about the rest of her close family? They've either gone, left, or died too. So she's, you know how you got that second cousin that's kind of in charge of that over there? And she remembers that he was rich. It's always good to have a rich relative if you can help it, if you can find it. And it was not unusual for somebody to go and glean. Gleaning means whatever they dropped when they were picking the good stuff, whatever they left because it wasn't the best stuff, then people could come along and get it. Come along and get it. Some independence. Okay. You ever had a time of being independent and it wasn't necessarily the best time? You ever had to move out of somewhere and you don't have much? You ever had your car break down and at least you're not riding a pig like on that commercial, but you have to figure out how to get rides, things like that? Now we're going to begin to see some shift. They're still poor. They're still without husbands, men to protect them. That's about to take some change. Look at chapter 2, verses 5 to 9. I think this is one of the cutest settings in the Bible. Boaz asked his young servant, who was foreman over the farmlands, "Who's this young woman? Where did she come from?" The foreman said, "Well, that's the Moabite girl. She's that foreigner. The one who came with Naomi from the country of Moab. She asked permission. 'Let me glean,' she said, 'and gather among the sheaves, following after your harvesters.' She's been at it steady ever since, from early morning until now, without even so much as a break." Then Boaz spoke to Ruth. "Listen, my daughter," that gives you some idea of the age difference. "Listen, my daughter, from now on, don't go to any other field to glean. Stay right here in this one. Stay close to my young women. Watch where they are harvesting and follow them. And don't worry about a thing. I've given orders to my servants not to harass you. When you get thirsty, feel free to go and drink from the water buckets that the servants have filled." Man, there's a lot happens in those few little verses. Boaz is the rich man. He's out checking out the property. And she catches his eye. People grew up in the same little town, they know who's there. If you've ever lived in a small town, they'll tell you if a different car comes through. They'll tell you if they see somebody walking down the street they're not used to. Kind of like how we are here. Somebody different walks in the door and you're like, everybody turns. You know.
They tell you mother if you're out doing something wrong too.
That's right. That's right. I never had that happen, but I can understand. Some people might understand that know about it. I'm gonna be in trouble. So Boaz notices her. And probably what was even stranger is he went over and spoke to her. Can you hear what a step that was for him and surely for Ruth? What do you think she thought was going to happen when the owner comes walking over to her? She probably thought he was going to throw her out. Yeah. But what was the key word that made the connection for them there, besides that she was good looking? Naomi. She came back with Naomi. And Boaz knew that was part of his, extended family. Knew that was going to happen. With this independence and with this respect comes along the respect for who she is. Notice the worker didn't just say, "And boy, isn't she a good-looking woman?" What did he compliment?
A hard worker.
A hard worker. A hard worker. And not only a hard worker, but I hate to use this term, she knew her place. She wasn't trying to blend in with the regular workers and get the good stuff. She was following just like she was supposed to. It's going to come up important in a few minutes. She was respected for who she was. When he said, "Who is that?" and I don't know what it says. I forget what it says in here, but basically they say, who does she belong to in some scriptures? And basically the answer is she doesn't belong to anybody. Now that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because nobody's going to be upset that she's there and come fuss while he's letting her be in his field. But it's a bad thing because that means she has no one to protect her. No one to protect her. This is another one of the stories that could have gone in so many different directions. So many different directions. She's respected, not because she's being all socially proper. Notice she didn't fall on her knees and beg. I get the idea she's working, he just comes over and starts talking to her, which is so different in this Old Testament world. We get respect when we're taken seriously, listened to, and given intellectual attention. Boaz listened to her. Boaz listened to her. Now in verse 10, she drops to her knees, then bowed her face to the ground. This is after he's given her permission, right? How does this happen that you should pick me out and treat me so kindly? Me, a foreigner. That tells you she knew her situation. She knew that it shouldn't have happened. She knew that it wasn't normal for him to be welcoming her like that. See, there's more to this story than just 2 or 3 little sentences. Verse 10, verse 11. Boaz answered her, I've heard all about you. Small town, somebody different comes in. Heard about the way you treated your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, and how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and have come to live among a bunch of total strangers. God reward you well for what you've done, and with a generous bonus besides from God to whom you've come, seeking protection under his wings. Again, think of the stories that have already been told. It's not just who's that foreigner that Naomi's dragging back here with her. Who could have told the story of how Ruth had been? Only Naomi. So she's been saying, you may not like this girl, you may think she's real different, but let me tell you how she's treated me. How she's treated me. Verse 13, she said, Oh, sir, such grace, such kindness, I don't deserve it. You've touched my heart and treated me like one of your own, and I don't even belong here. That kindness word is going to show up a lot through this book, and it's that word, Hebrew word, hesed, H-E-S-E-D. And it's used a lot throughout the Hebrew scriptures, and usually in the term of loving kindness. It's not just kindness, but really generous, loving kindness. At the lunch break, Boaz said to her, Come over here and eat some bread, dip it in the wine. Boaz is kind of hanging out with the workers a little long time today. So she joined the harvesters. Boaz passed the roasted grain to her, and she ate her fill and even had some left over. Sounds like she might have been a little hungry. When she got up to go back to work, Boaz ordered his servants, Let her glean where there's still plenty of grain on the ground. Make it easy for her. Better yet, pull out some of the good stuff and leave it for her to glean. Give her special treatment. Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. When she threshed out what she'd gathered, she ended up with nearly a full sack of barley. She gathered up her gleanings and went back to town and showed her mother-in-law the results of her day's work. She also gave her the leftovers from her lunch. Again, I wondered when I was reading this again today, I've read it so many times, how did the workers feel about that? Because if they're giving her some of their good stuff, that's cutting down on what they'd be turning in. You ever thought about that? I think I hear this a lot today when somebody goes in a convenience store and they come out and they go, Oh, those so-and-sos, they own all the stores now. You know what I'm talking about? Well, you know what? Your candy bar in that store costs the same thing it's going to cost you, maybe a little less than the store down the street. But there's something about whether we're going to accept foreigners or think they're taking away our jobs. When I hear that about the Mexicans in California, I immediately go down the 101 highway, just past Thousand Oaks, where Smucker's grows their strawberries. And I think about those women, mostly women I would see out there for hours, bent over, picking those strawberries so we can have it on our toast. I don't see very many middle-class white Americans out there picking those strawberries. But we want the Smuckers. It's not a little political tangent for a moment. So Boaz talks about the recognition of her quality of work, the values in her life. And even though she's an outcast, she calls herself. And yet Boaz realizes what good she has been to his family, maybe his extended family. Okay, so now we've been through loss, change, transformation, aging, independence, respect, recognition. And then we run into something called insight. Sometimes you have to back off from what's going on in your life and try to look at how it's all fit together. Sometimes my life looks like a really messy piece of tapestry. If I'm looking at the back, and all I see are these hanging strings and these weird knots. And every once in a while I can turn that around and see, oh, that's why that happened. That's how that worked together. It ends up being something really cool. Would anyone dare read verses 18 to 23? Actually, 19 to 23.
Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz, she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and to the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." When Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
It's interesting in the Message Bible it says, verse 20, "While God bless that man, God hasn't quite walked out on us after all. God still loves us in bad times as well as good." Can't you see a smile on that lady's face? And she brings home all this good food. Can't you see the smile on her face there? And then she finds out that it was Boaz's field. There's lots of fields, but it was Boaz. And then I think Naomi probably went, "Phew, that's a safe place. That's a safe place." Some insight. Naomi knew the kind of men that were in the world. She grew up in that town. You know, she knew who their daddies were. She knew how it might be. And she didn't want Ruth to just find a breadwinner, but she wanted to find a good man that would be good with her and good for her. Empowerment. Somebody's going to stand up for themselves now, or lay down for themselves. One day her mother-in-law Naomi said to Ruth, "My dear daughter, isn't it about time I arrange a good home for you so you can have a happy life?" Yenta, let's get it together here. "And isn't Boaz our close relative, the one with whom you young women you've been working? Maybe it's time to make our move." I love this. Whoops, I think I missed a line, getting tickled. Tonight is the night of Boaz's barley harvest at the threshing floor. Take a bath, put on some perfume, get all dressed up and go to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you're there until the party is well underway and he's had plenty of food and drink. When you see him slipping off to sleep, watch where he lies. And then go there. Lie down at his feet to let him know that you're available to him for marriage. Then wait and see what he says. He'll tell you what to do." Ruth said, "If you say so, I'll do it, just as you've told me." Now, I kind of doubt that's how things were done in Moab. But Ruth has given her these instructions. And I have a Bible in there that's a women's Bible from a very conservative standpoint. And this commentator spends all this time saying, well, now some people think this could have been, but it wasn't. Some people think that something, it could be, no, it wasn't. And I think it's so funny because it just says what it says. She also does acknowledge in that commentary that feet were often a euphemism for genitalia. But it wasn't that kind of thing, she says. So what's happening here? If this, how is this empowerment? Can you see the women standing up at this point? Naomi standing up and says, "Man, it's time we get you married. I'm old. I might die. You gotta get you a husband. You gotta get you a husband." And she knows, again, because she grew up there, she knows how those guys are on that harvest night. They're not just sitting there counting their shekels and trying to figure out how much barley they've gained. It's a party. It's a big party. So Ruth chooses to go and follow what Naomi has sent her to do. Can you imagine what she's thinking? If you tell me to do it, I'll do it. That's not how we do it at home. 6 to 14. She went down to the threshing floor and put her mother-in-law's plan into action. Boaz had a good time eating and drinking his fill. He felt great. Then he went off to get some sleep, lying down at the end of a stack of barley. Ruth quietly followed. She lay down to signal her availability for marriage. I don't think she said, you know, I'd really like a ring on this finger. You know, it's just, yeah, funny. Sorry. In the middle of the night, the man was suddenly startled and sat up. Surprise! This woman asleep at his feet. He said, "And who are you?" Now remember, it's dark, and he's had a few cocktails. She said, "I'm Ruth, your maiden. Take me under your protective wing. You're my close relative, you know, in the circle of covenant redeemers. You do have the right to marry me." So Ruth gave her a little more instruction than just put on some perfume and go lay at his feet. She helped her understand the legal reasons why Ruth could be married to Boaz. It's interesting because in the part we're not going to read, but you can read yourself, he's such a gentleman. He sends her off before the sun comes up so nobody will have seen her making herself available for marriage. Which I think is really good because, again, remember, she's not from there. She's a foreigner. She looks different. She talks differently. And people could get the wrong idea about that. So it's really interesting because you meant he was one of her covenant relatives. There was another relative who was closer to Naomi and Ruth than Boaz. He's a really interesting guy here. Chapter 4, Boaz went straight to the public square and took his place there. First of all, look back for just a minute. Verse 18, Naomi said, "Sit back and relax, my dear daughter, until we find out how things turn out. That man isn't going to fool around. Mark my words, he's going to get everything wrapped up today." I can see Naomi just being really tickled. It's going to work. So when you get to be a matchmaker and you see it work. Boaz went straight to the public square and took his place there. Before long, the closer relative, the one mentioned earlier by Boaz, strolled by. "Step aside, old friend. Let's take a seat. Let's talk a minute." Boaz then gathered 10 of the town elders together and said, 10 of the elders then made it an official gathering. Okay? Boaz said to his relative, "The piece of property that belonged to our relative Elimelech is being sold by his widow Naomi, who's just returned from the country of Moab." Because, you know, that day, property stayed in your family. Whether you were there for it or not, it was your family. Who's just returned. "I thought you ought to know about it. Buy it back if you want. You can make it official in the presence of those sitting here and before the town elders. You have first redeemer rights. If you don't want it, tell me. I know where I stand. You're first in line to do this, and I'm next after you." And the guy says, "Wow, I'll buy it. I'll buy it." And then Boaz, "You realize, don't you, that when you buy the field from Naomi, you also get Ruth the Moabite, the widow of our dead relative, along with the redeemer responsibilities. Responsibility to have children with her to carry on the family inheritance." Then the relative said, "Oh, I can't do that. I jeopardize my own family's inheritance. You go ahead and buy it. You can have my rights. I can't do it." So I'd always been taught that he didn't want to do it because he didn't want to be with the Moabite. There's another layer to this. If he married Ruth or took her as a wife or whatever, and they had children, then that child would have access to all of his property as well as Naomi's. It's kind of like, you know, when divorced or widowed people get together and sometimes the children want to know, "Now, what's this person doing? They're going to take my daddy's stuff, my mama's stuff." And so maybe in some of the Moabite piece, but mostly he didn't want to jeopardize his own inheritance. I love the fact, remember how we keep saying Boaz was an honorable man? Notice how he's doing all this legally. This next part of the story is one my mom used to teach to her first grade kids, and they just thought it was the funniest thing in the world. In olden times, this is how they handled official business regarding matters of property inheritance. A man would take off his shoe and give it to the other person. This was the same as an official seal or personal signature in Israel. I always wondered, do they get their shoe back? What, you know, can I make an agreement with Trips and he'll give me one of his shoes at least, okay? So the guy says, go ahead and buy it. Sign the deal by pulling off his shoe. Strange. Okay. Verse 11. All the people in the town square that day, backing up the elders, said, yes, we're witnesses. May God make this woman who is coming to your household like Rachel and Leah, the two women who built the family of Israel. May God make you a pillar in Ephrathah and famous in Bethlehem. With the children God gives you from this young woman, your family rival the family of Perez, the son Tamar bore to Judah. So, golly gee, guess what happens next? They get married. Gave his wife. Now it clearly says he slept with her now. Okay, I guess the symbolism can be dropped. By God's gracious gift, she conceived and had a son. Boy, what a new thing for Naomi. What a new thing for Naomi. Everybody's so excited about that. And Naomi took the child, verse 16, laid it in her lap and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son. Notice they don't say Ruth. They say Naomi has a son because it's continuing that line. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And what town was it they were living in? Bethlehem. So this goes on then to begin that line. And who's the great grandson of all this? Jesus. Jesus. When you go back and look at some of the genealogy of the gospel, it takes you back to Ruth. A Moabite becomes the great grandmother of Jesus. Even as a child, I remember thinking, well, that's not how they say things are supposed to be. Should have been a really pure line through this. This was before you had interracial marriages very much. I grew up in a time when it was hard to let a Baptist marry a Methodist. And oh my goodness, if there's a Baptist marrying a Catholic, people just wouldn't even go to the wedding. You know, it's awful, no offense. You know, it's just that kind of guidelines, forget any others. But it's amazing how God can use who God chooses to use. And through this story, the whole world took on a new meaning. Outcasts were taken in, the lowly was raised up. And I don't know how much stories Jesus got told about his ancestors, but I wonder if that lodged in his mind when he was so often talking about him being here for the whole world. Comments, thoughts? We're not going to get to Boaz's part tonight. I'm going to spend about 10-15 minutes at the beginning of next week about Boaz, so I want you to look through and see any times you think Boaz was being generous. There's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times Boaz was being generous. And I'll give a gold star whoever finds out all 6. Any last minute thoughts, prayer requests, praises? We have another group coming to look at the building tomorrow, around 11:30. If you happen to be thinking about it, would you lift that in prayer? You know, you never know where God's going to lead. I keep thinking today about what I said about presence and presence. Thinking about that when I was walking through the sanctuary today. And I know God has a great future for us and a great use for this facility.